You know, I don't think I ever actually introduced myself in any of my videos. For those of you who don't know, my name is John. I'm the main person behind Room 100 right now, and I recently put out the Tourist Tales EP, which is part senior project for college and part my first solo project that I've ever done. I'm really proud of how all the songs came out, and I think people are really enjoying them. So I wanted to make these videos to show the process of writing, recording, and finishing these songs, to not only show the work and what I did to make it sound the way it is, but also as a potential jumping off point for people for their own music. Believe me, I know firsthand how difficult it can be to write songs. There's a ton of places where you can get stopped up. Sometimes you have a theme in mind, but you don't know how to put that lyrically, or you have lyrics, but you have no idea how to make instruments fit into that, or you have something really cool in your head that you just don't know how to realize with instruments or lyrics. Sometimes songs come really naturally, but sometimes they don't. So that's what I hope that these behind the scenes videos help with. There's three major parts to creating and releasing songs that I'm going to touch on, and those are the writing process, the general tech phase of recording, mixing, and mastering songs, and finally the publishing phase. I'm going to go through those three phases all together in this video, but I'm also going to release separate videos for each of the 5 songs on the EP to show specifically what I did on each of those songs, how they fit into the theme of the EP, writing lyrically and instrumentally, and all of that fun stuff. When looking at the 5 songs on the Tourist Tales EP, I started out with the question of what kind of genre do I want these 5 songs to fit in. While I usually write in a more rock, pop, punk kind of genre, for this EP I really wanted to push my usual writing style into more of an alternative pop kind of setting, and in general I wanted this EP to appeal to a broader audience. For me, it was easy enough to have 5 songs all fit into the same theme because I came up with the idea for the EP before I actually finished all the songs. However, you might have songs that you already have completed or are working on. Instead of trying to finish those for a broader idea, you can just have those finished songs and then see what fits best together. Because you don't want to mix together completely different genres or themes on your EP or album. Everything should feel cohesive in one way or another. When it comes to the nitty-gritty writing of each of the songs, really most of the EP was written within a 2-week span around November of 2017, and the songs were tweaked progressively as I moved ahead. So when I first started writing songs for the EP, instrumentally I knew that bass and kind of simple drum beats were the core of what I wanted the songs to be. So most of the songs in one way or another just started with me trying to find a catchy bass riff and putting a really simple drum loop over it that I could modify once I had an actual drummer in the studio. Another big point instrumentally for me was to try to de-emphasize guitar, again get away from my usual rock writing, and I was only sort of successful in doing that. Guitar still does play a really big role throughout the entire EP, and while it's not initially how I wanted it to go, I'm still really happy with the end product, and I might try to push away from it even more in the future. When it came to writing the lyrics for the EP, I knew right off the bat that I wanted to focus around the various insecurities that I have. You know, depression, loneliness, anxiety, worrying about the future, all that fun stuff. At this point, as much as I want these videos to be a starting point for your own songwriting process, I gotta say it's kind of hard to describe where to go once you have an idea at the base of the song. Here's a couple things that I will say. Don't be afraid to not start from a lyrical place or an instrumental place depending on what your usual writing style is. If you have a moment of inspiration, latch onto it and see what you can make out of it. Along with that, don't worry about rhyming necessarily. It's obviously a great tool in songwriting, but if you're writing a song and you just see that the storytelling and the message of the song is more important than the rhyming of it, especially in verses where the catchiness factor doesn't matter as much as the chorus all the time, I would say just don't worry about it, just write and see what comes out. Instrumentally, if you have a hard time making things as complex as you want them to, I would say start from a simpler place or try to start with a melody and build chords around that and then the weirdness will kind of take over from there as you find new ways to play around with that melody or that chord progression. Or from the opposite perspective, sometimes you want to make sure that your writing isn't too complex and is appropriate for a pop song setting. This was something that I definitely had to do and mostly succeeded in, except for the 7/4 section of Bug Problem, but we're not going to talk about that. So I would say if you're trying to make a simple, catchy song, just make a chord progression, and instead of trying to build off of it or make it weird, limit yourself to the lyrical writing or adding layers on top of that, instead of trying to add weird time signatures or chord changes or things like that. Make sure you're always recording ideas onto your phone or onto a notepad, because it's very easy to forget those fleeting moments of inspiration. If you're bringing old ideas for songs into the mix, don't be afraid to mess around with them and change them. It can be really easy to get attached to ideas as they build and progress in your mind, but sometimes it's really important to change those ideas so they fit the new song that you're making or the overall EP. So just don't get too attached to those kinds of ideas. The same thing for new ideas too. If you make this new riff or this new line that you really, really like, but then as the song continues to build, it slowly begins to not fit as well, don't stubbornly try to keep it in there and just say it fits because you like it. Try to adapt and change it in some way. That'll help the overall quality of the song. Don't try to mesh ideas together that just don't fit. This kind of goes for the last thing I said as well. But if there's just completely different chord progressions or feels that you want to put together, but if it doesn't fit for the type of song you're trying to write, if you're trying to write a more straightforward song, just save those two ideas for completely different songs. And again, that'll help those two songs individually more than just hurting that one song. The final thing I'll say about songwriting is it's a good idea to use reference tracks to look at things like the composition or the arrangements, the instruments that they use, the general length of the song and when certain parts like the verses and choruses come in. But make sure you don't stray too far into just straight up copying songs. I mean, it can be hard to do that sometimes just because of the types of chord progressions that are commonly used or the common melodies that are in so many songs, but just try to be careful about using too much of the theme or the actual notation of the songs that you're looking at to avoid making it seem like you're just kind of ripping them off. Again, if you want to hear more about my actual writing process for the instruments and lyrics of the 5 songs on my EP, I'm going to have separate videos for all 5 of those songs, so make sure you check those out. So here's the part that requires a lot of money. Well, that's not necessarily true. Depending on the type of songs you're writing, you can really create any kind of song or sound that you're looking for now between computers and plugins and things like that. You can easily get an affordable mic and audio interface and just completely realize any of the ideas that you have. But I will say that depending again on the types of songs that you're writing, you definitely do need a certain level of equipment to achieve the sound you're looking for. Luckily, I had the recording studio at Millersville University and all of that lovely equipment. The entire EP was made between November 2017 and June 2018. So I would say the actual recording of the EP took place between January and May of 2018. I'm just going to talk about the mics that I had at my disposal, how I chose to use them, and generally my process for recording the EP. So the condenser microphones that I used were the Neumann U87, 2 AKG 414s, 2 Neumann TLM 192s, and 2 Shure SM81s. For dynamic microphones, I had a bunch of Shure SM57s, an AKG D112, and an Electrovox RE20. The drums were the first thing that I recorded because I'm a civilized human being, and it was all recorded in one session, D112 on the inside of the kick, the RE20 on the outside of the kick. I had 2 SM57s on the snare, one on the top, one on the bottom. I had a TLM on both of the toms. There was a rack and a floor tom. I had the 2 SM81s as cymbal overheads in a spaced pair. Then I had the 2 414s kind of in between the drum kit and the far wall, kind of as left and right ears facing towards the drums. And then finally I had a farther U87 on an angle from the drum kit so that the snare and the kick would basically be picked up as the center of the audio coming into the mic. My bass recording was actually a little bit complex, at least compared to how simple bass recording can be. So I had a 1/4-inch splitter going out of my bass. One of those feeds was going directly into a clean amp, which had an RE20 on it, and then was either DI'd directly from the amp or with a DI box. I forget which amp had the DI box and which just went straight out. Then with the other feed, I had a 1/4 inch going into my Russian Big Muff fuzz pedal, and then that went into an amp that had a D112 on it and was DI'd either through the amp or through a DI box. So that's 4 channels on 4 of the songs, everything besides Help Me Sleep, for one bass sound. And my general mentality for recording is to capture any sound that I might possibly need, just so I don't need to recreate anything digitally or get stuck without something that I need. So even though I didn't use all 4 tracks on every song, I think on Tourist Tales I even used just one bass sound, but I wanted to make sure that I had everything possible that I might need in post-production. Electric guitar recording was fairly simple compared to that. It was just 2 SM57s on an amp, one on the center of the cone and one off center, and then a 414 room mic, and I had my guitar going into a DI box, so I had that feed as well, then into pedals, then into the amp. Vocals was literally just one 414 in the booth instead of the live room, and then everything else was basically a 3 mic setup, and then just the positioning of those mics varied depending on the instrument. Those mics were the 2 414s and the 1 U87. The U87 was basically always a farther away room mic. Some of the mic setups were more about distance from the instrument, like for cello and trumpet it was basically a close, a medium, and a far mic. And then the other mic placements for those 3 mics were more directional based, such as the violin or the tuba, where I had a mic above, a mic in front, and then the room mic. Finally, I didn't really have anything in between the microphone and Pro Tools. The only thing that was really in between those were the preamps, which I had an Avalon, a Focusrite, and an Avid preamp. The first 2 are analog, and then the Avid is digital. Anything that I could, I ran through the Avalon or the Focusrite, mostly the Avalon. I think I really only used the Avid when I had drums spilling over because I just had so many mics coming in. In every recording session, I basically tried to knock out all of the songs for one instrument in every session. So first I did drums, then bass, then acoustic, electric, and piano all in one session. That made me want to die. Then I had a session for tuba and vocoder. I had a session for sax, trumpet, violin, and cello. And then finally I had a couple sessions for vocals, along with one session after mine to do tambourine. My major piece of advice when planning your sessions is make sure you're planning them in a way that will help build the album in a manageable way that you'll be able to kind of pick away at as you move on. And like I said about my one session, don't try to do too much all in one day, especially if you're a solo act like me who's literally hitting record and running out to the live room to play the guitar or the piano. It just drives you insane, especially depending on how much time you have booked in the studio. Like I said, make sure you capture any sound that you think you'll need. That way you don't get stuck in the mixing and mastering phases trying to work with sounds that you just don't like or things that it would be better if you liked it one way or another. And make sure if you're stuck and don't know how to record a certain instrument, if you've never worked with something like a violin or a trumpet before, just basically think and use your ears as to how you usually hear the instrument. Close miking isn't always the way. Sometimes it's good to just get that 2 mics as ears kind of sound and make sure you're just hearing the full instrument as you normally would in person. My general workflow was to record everything, then find the best takes and cut them all together. Then I would throw on EQ compression, get a rough mix, add effects as I felt they were needed, then get an even tighter mix, and then once I was happy with it, I would put it into mastering. It's really important to listen on as many types of speakers and headphones as you can get, and car speakers are especially important too, just a side note. But the main things that I mixed on were my headphones, which is just like a cheap $20 pair of Sony headphones, and then my nice mixing speakers, which are these. They're really nice and helped me get a much fuller idea of what my song was actually sounding like. Once the 5 songs were mixed as good as I could get them, I then put it back into a different Pro Tools session, the 5 full audio files on 5 different tracks, along with some reference tracks, mostly for each individual song, but a couple just because they're songs that I think are really well mixed, and overall try to get up to that level for the 5 songs. I actually double mastered every track to make sure that they were both loud enough and clean enough. Nothing was clipping, but it was still up to radio standards. My first level of mixing was a lot of the more drastic EQ, cutting some very specific frequencies and just generally bringing up the high and the low and cutting some of that mid out and pushing the maximum pretty hard, but not quite hard enough to make it so that it might be as loud as some of my reference tracks, but is starting to sound gross and is starting to lose some of the character of the song. Once I got that mixed down, I then put those bounce tracks back in the same session, then just did a little bit of EQing just to kind of brighten it up a little bit or get rid of gross frequencies that were starting to appear song to song. Then I finally used Maxim again to get it up as high as I could without making it sound gross to those reference tracks. So now comes the final step of this whole process. You've got your finished songs, you like how they sound, and you're ready to share it with the world. There's a couple things to keep in mind before and while you're trying to do this to make sure that your songs are getting to the ears that need to hear them, and some other stuff is going on to make sure that they're as good a finished product as they can be. So one of the final steps before you start to publish your work is to get artwork for the single, EP, or album that you're creating. It's very important that you have some good artwork that really fits with the feel and the theme of the song or songs that you're trying to share. When I think about some of my favorite albums, the color and just the feel of the album covers that have gone with them really just becomes ingrained in the idea and concept behind the album. And really you can do whatever you want with the artwork. It can just be a picture of you, or it can be more elaborate, or it could be really whatever you want. But in my opinion, some things to keep in mind should be that the imagery fits the theme or feel of the songs that you're releasing, and in general the colors should in some way evoke the same emotions and ideas that are coming from the EP or album. For the Taurus Tales artwork, it was actually an idea that I had pretty early on once I locked in the name Taurus Tales. Even though space isn't really a theme of the EP, the feeling of isolation was again a very important theme to the song Taurus Tales, but also to the EP in general. And so that was an artistic idea that I had very early on for the EP artwork. Originally I was thinking about maybe making the person on the moon an alien, but I thought that the astronaut better symbolized that, yeah, it's a human just like everyone down on Earth, but there's just this immense, complete separation that is stopping him from being down with everyone else. And that's something that I felt fit the theme of the EP very well. I'm also just a sucker for space, so once you have the artwork and once you have the songs and once you make sure you credit everyone, then it's time to get it out there and share it with everyone. The main ways that I did this were through YouTube, Bandcamp, and CDB. YouTube and Bandcamp I don't want to go too into because it's pretty simple, it's free. All you need to do is just make sure you're uploading everything to the right place. You might need to pop the album cover onto a video so that you can upload it to YouTube, but overall those are fairly simple processes. But for me, this was the first time that I used CD Baby or any kind of bigger publishing site like it, so there was definitely some hesitation and some concern as I went through the steps, making sure everything was spelled correctly, all the credits were where they were supposed to be, that the amount of money I was spending would be worth it to make sure it was getting to as many ears as possible. And I definitely recommend CD Baby because I never really felt lost, and despite the price that could be a little steep for some artists just starting out, I think it is a really important step to make sure that as many people are hearing your music as possible. My final choice when I was publishing this EP was, do I want to have any physical media for the release of the EP? And ultimately I decided on no. I've done a homemade physical release before with a different band, and so much money can just get sunk into it and not enough people buy physical anymore, especially at this low of a level. So ultimately it was a decision that I felt would be smarter and more cost effective to not go with physical releases. If you have a full-length album and you could maybe promote them with live shows and things like that, then it might be worth it. But if you like to get as artistically in depth as I like to with my album releases, sometimes the cost can just outweigh the good that it would do to have physical releases. And once you have all that figured out, then you're done. Then you just basically sit and wait as people begin to react and you start to hear some comments and criticisms or positives about your work. So I want to use this last bit of the video to basically talk about the aftermath of the release of Taurus Tales, a couple things that have been cool about its release, and a couple things that I've had to address to make sure everything was going smoothly. So on the whole, Taurus Tales has been by far the most successful thing I've ever released. The one with the most views right now is What You Want to Be, because it was shared by the amazing Joetta over on her Absolute Art page. That has over 1,000 views, which is, again, by far the best that anything I've made has done. Then the least views is A Fluctuating Tide between Tourist Tales and Help Me Sleep. On Bandcamp there is 16 downloads, most of them are of the full EP, and then there's an even spread of all of the single songs anyway, so I don't know why they didn't just get the full download. Not too much to say about my online streaming numbers, except that for some reason Help Me Sleep has a ton of views from Ireland on Spotify. I don't know how or why. In general, word of mouth reaction, I think everyone kind of has their own favorite song. The only song that's kind of gotten left behind is the title track, Tourist Tales, that has some of the least views and is generally the least talked about to me, which I think is a shame because I actually really like the production and how that song came out, and it's so important to the meaning of Tourist Tales as an EP. But Barred Voices is one of the highest regarded songs on there, which shocks me because I hate anything that I sing on. What You Wanna Be Again has a ton of views and people seem to really like that. And then Bug Problem and Help Me Sleep are probably the most highly talked about amongst my friends and family. So overall, I definitely can't say I'm disappointed with how well it's going over. I've had a couple issues with CD Baby's publishing, not necessarily directly with them, but with the sites and services that they're connected to. For example, I had to make sure that my Spotify songs were separate from another artist whose name is Room 100 who released like one song. And that same exact issue is happening on YouTube right now with the Topic channel, but no one's really watching those, so I'm not in a rush to make sure that gets sorted out. And for some reason, there's two Room 100 Topic channels. There's one that's just my stuff, and then there's one that's my stuff and that same one song. So I don't know, I'll have to figure that out at some point, but again, those aren't getting the views that are on my actual channel. Regardless, that all seems pretty easily solved with CD Baby, which is nice that they're able to do that pretty effortlessly. Some more advice that I would give to you when you're releasing your own work is make sure that you're making as many connections as you can, not only with your fellow musician friends, but with anything that might happen online as you start to publish your work. Finally, I think the main thing hurting the EP with its release is the fact that I don't really have a band. This is just a solo act right now, with me doing pretty much all of the instruments and then bringing in singers. So I can't tour or play live shows playing the songs of this EP, which is definitely hurting getting it exposed to the Philly audience. I don't necessarily mind it. It gives me time to release more work and have a larger base of work that I can play live, because I don't think all of the Tourist Tales songs are suitable to play live. But like I said, it definitely hurts. Touring is the main way now to promote your album or your EP or whatever. So definitely keep that in mind, especially for expenses too. And just make sure that you're able to get out there and play as much as possible, because like I said, that's where the eyes are now. I think that's basically everything I can talk about. Check out the other 5 videos if you want to see cool mixing and editing stuff, or how I wrote certain songs instrumentally or lyrically. And like I said, I don't really have a band right now to play with or to write with, so if you are interested in being a part of Room 100, then definitely let me know. I would love to start collaborating with people. The full Tourist Tales EP is out now, and I have a ton of other content on the channel, so if you're interested in any of that, definitely check it out. Thanks for watching. I hope that what I've said is able to help you create your own songs and to maybe push past some writer's block. That can definitely happen. If there's anything more specific that you would like me to talk about in any of my process of creating a song, definitely comment and let me know. Please subscribe, and once again, thanks for watching.